Welcome to the No Quit Living podcast, where we aim to inspire and motivate people to never give up on themselves or their dreams. We will chat with highly successful people from all walks of life and discuss what motivates and drives them to successfully attack life head on and never give up. Welcome to episode number 35 of the No Quit Living podcast. I'm your host, Christopher J. Worth, and today's theme of the day is taking action. Our quote of the day comes to us from Steve Maraboli: take action. An inch of movement will bring you closer to your goals than a mile of intention. I think today's episode is going to inspire you to take action. I'm beyond grateful and humbled to be able to introduce today's guest. In addition to being an incredible person, in today's episode, he absolutely brings it. When it comes to delivering both quality and content, today's guest knocked the ball out of the park. He also happens to be the host of one of the top business podcasts. It is my complete honor and privilege to introduce Geoff Woods. Geoff, I'd like to welcome you to the No Quit Living podcast.
Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
Appreciate it. First question I have is, are you ready to make it happen today?
Always.
I figured you'd say that much. So our number one objective is to motivate and inspire our listeners. I wanted to ask if you could share either a personal story about perseverance or perhaps a challenging time that tested you, but you kept on going and never quit.
Sure. So November 1st of 2015, I moved my family to Austin, Texas to start a company with Gary Keller, who started Keller Williams. It's the largest real estate company in the world, and his co-author, Jay Papasan. They wrote The One Thing. They wanted to turn The One Thing into a big training and education company, and I was going to be the guy to start the company. And right off the bat, I was told, Gary told me directly, that they invested 5 years reading or researching and writing the book so that the bar for quality would just be exceptionally high. And as a result, it's now the highest rated business book of all time. So the 5 years paid off. The tricky part here is he said, your job is to raise the bar, not lower the bar. So right off the bat, I'm being told that the bar is already set exceptionally high. Your job is to raise it. So I create a master course on time blocking, which is the idea of scheduling time with yourself to do your most important work until the point it becomes a habit. We launched this course. Crazy successful, made a lot of money, barely any refunds. Yet the problem was when I finished my webinar and Jay was in the room and we saw how much money had been made, we looked at each other like, holy cow. But we also looked at each other and knew it was broken because we had followed all the models that are prevalent today in internet marketing. The problem with them is they inherently chase short-term dollars, but they sacrifice long-term value, trust, and brand. I knew in that moment that there was no amount of money that I could possibly make that would warrant undermining the brand of The One Thing, undermining Gary's brand, undermining Jay's brand. In that moment, when you think that you've made it, that you've, quote unquote, achieved success, and to realize immediately you have to stop doing what you're doing and reinvent yourself is an incredibly low. And that was that defining moment for me where I had to recast a North Star and say, I'm going to have to take the long path. I'm going to have to do it the hard way, but it's going to be the sustainable way.
It's so interesting you mentioned that. I just want to make sure I understood it. Short-term dollars versus long-term value and brand. Did I get that correct?
Yeah.
That is remarkable. And I need to tell you, not a plug for the book, but for those listeners that have not read The One Thing, I would highly recommend that as well. And I got to tell you, Geoff, I'm a big fan and listener to your podcast, The One Thing, and I would also highly recommend that to our listeners as well. Your show delivers great content each and every episode, but one of the things you often discuss are two topics that are near and dear to No Quit Living, which are accountability and CTA, what we call our calls to action. I got to ask, but what has been your biggest challenge with hosting and creating such a successful podcast?
Oh, man. Well, first and foremost, thank you. That means a lot. I don't necessarily know the challenge, this has actually come kind of easy to me, which is not super helpful for people, but it's part of it is the fact that you'll never hear me in front of you say that I'm a guru or that I'm an expert. You'll always hear me say I'm just like you. I'm a guy with really big dreams who happens to have some pretty awesome mentors, and I'm willing to be vulnerable along the way. And I think that's why it's done so well, is people realize that I'm not trying to do it to make money. I'm not trying to do it to puff my chest out or to get a big name. I'm doing it because I really want to document the journey and help people get more out of their time. The biggest challenge is ultimately that, and this is another one of those things that Gary and Jay said to me, the fastest way for me to make sure that I get out of business with them is to not walk the talk. I cannot be the face of the one thing and not take the actions and not live the book, not live the content. So when you become the face of a brand, it's just a higher standard that's established. And you said this word, accountability. It's a higher level of accountability. I have to live it. And when I fail, I have to very publicly declare it.
No, that's amazing in regards to just how you go about it and walking the walk. And that's something we talk about at No Quit Living often, is there's a significant difference of thinking, wanting, talking versus actually doing and taking action. So I definitely would say that not only do you walk the talk when it comes to the one thing, but you definitely live it each and every day. One thing you just mentioned is mentor. And obviously you mentioned that you've had some great mentors. Might be a tough question, but for some of our listeners who are maybe thinking or wanting to find a mentor, I was curious if you had a suggestion of a way that somebody could possibly go about finding a mentor.
Yeah, 100%. Well, I have an entire separate podcast that's dedicated to this called The Mentee. This is how I got my start. I was in medical device sales and I knew I wanted to start a business, but didn't know how. I heard the Jim Rohn quote that you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with. I realized if I could surround myself with the right mentors, it would illuminate the path for me. And I started pressing record as a way to document the journey, not knowing what would happen so fast. So that's an entire podcast dedicated to it. If you guys want it all in one action punch, go to episode 49 of The One Thing. I specifically talked about how you find a mentor. To break it down for you here, however, and Chris, can I just use you as a live example?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Did I prep you for this?
Not at all.
Okay. So folks, he has no idea what's coming. This is how you find a mentor. First and foremost, you have to recognize that a mentor serves you best in their area of expertise. Meaning, if you wanted to get into real estate investing, you shouldn't be seeking guidance from somebody who's an expert in stocks. Go to where the experts are. Okay. So Chris, out of everything you're working on right now, where do you need help most?
Getting our podcast out to more people.
Okay, cool. So here's what I love about what you just said. It was one sentence. For you who is listening to this, the CTA, if you will, answer the question. Where do you need help most right now? If you have to ramble, it's not clear enough. You need to get it down to the point where you can say it in a sentence, maybe two, maybe. Now, Chris, you need help getting your podcast out to more people. Can you describe the ideal person who could guide you?
The ideal person would be somebody that is either been involved with launching a successful podcast or possibly been involved with multiple podcasts, I believe, as far as somebody that would really be a good mentor for No Quit Living.
Great. So to recap what you said is you're looking for help in getting your podcast out to more people, and you're looking to meet people who have been able to successfully launch podcasts.
Correct.
Cool. Here's what I love about that. That whole thing took 2 sentences. Now, this is when you get to play the game of 6 degrees of separation. Are you familiar with that?
Yes,
6
sir.
degrees?
Well, I mean, we talk about No Quit Living, the 1 degree of separation, so we are very familiar with that.
Awesome. Every single day, we have conversations with other human beings. Oftentimes, they start with, "Hey, Chris, what's up? What's new?" And people say, "Not much."
Nothing.
It hit me one day when somebody asked me, "Geoff, what's up?" And I said, "Not much. What's up with?" And it was like, oh my gosh, that's a wasted opportunity. And so the next time somebody asked me a question like that, where the natural answer would have been not much, I switched it. So Chris, in yours, you'd say, actually, a lot recently. I just got clarity on the fact that I really need help getting No Quit Living out to more people. And I'm looking to surround myself with people who have successfully launched podcasts. You zip your mouth after you say that. Because when you do that, one of four things happens. Number one, you happen to have shared it with a person who can actually guide you. In this case, you have. I didn't know that that's where you needed help. We can absolutely have a conversation around that. Because you shared it, you're going to get the guidance. Now, let's say that I'm not the guy. You have no idea the fact that I'm in relationship with some of the top podcasters in the world and that I would consider making a connection for you. But let's say I'm not the guy. I don't happen to know all the right people. What you've done is you've planted a seed in my mind. And whether as I continue to form new relationships, if I come across somebody who seems to have a successful podcast, there would be that light bulb that goes off in my mind. And in that moment, I would consider making that introduction. Or option 4 is I do absolutely nothing. And what did you lose? Here's case in point of this. It sounds very high level, very, Geoff, you just put it out there and it'll come to you. This is it in action. Chris, I was exactly where you were 3 years ago. I wanted to start a podcast. I thought of the Jim Rohn quote, okay, if I want to start a podcast, then I need to surround myself with successful podcasters. I got clarity on the fact that I needed to at least talk about it. The very first time somebody asked me what's new, and I said, I'm going to launch a podcast and I'm really looking to meet some successful podcasters. He goes, I've got a buddy. His name's Pat Flynn. Let me introduce you to him. I had no idea who Pat Flynn was. Turns out he's one of the top guys. And Pat gave me some guidance. I recorded the conversation. Following what he shared with me, I hit the top 20 in business. That was the first time I shared it. And I've done this time and time and time again. So for the call to action for everybody, break it down. Step 1, where do you need help most right now? Step 2, describe the person who can guide you. Step 3, share it at least once a day and watch what happens.
That is some great information about mentors, and I got to be honest with you, I haven't thought about it to the extent that you just mentioned, and it really opened up my eyes in the sense of if you can describe something in 2 sentences or less, I think that's a good indication that you know what you are looking for, trying to go after, and I think hopefully our listeners, if anything, take that away is to drill down and to be more specific. Would you agree with that aspect?
Yes.
Awesome. No, I assumed you would, but it's interesting when you actually take a look at how specific you can be, and I think the more specific you are, obviously the more focused and disciplined you're going to be to hit that target or to get that accomplishment.
Mm-hmm.
Question for you, and this is a loaded question in the sense that you'll see why at the end, but many of our listeners are into personal development and looking to improve different areas of their life. I was curious if you had a favorite book or if you've read a book recently that you'd like to recommend to our listeners. And the reason it's a loaded question is the one book you can't recommend is the one thing.
Personal development.
Or something else that had a significant, it could be another book that just stood out to you in a different way. I'm always looking to bring value to our listeners and always looking to possibly recommend different things for them to check out. I'm going to go in it may not apply to everybody, but I'm staring at it right now, and it's called Exponential Organizations. It's written by Salim Ismail. He started Singularity University's partners with Peter Diamandis. The reason, this is one of the books that Gary Keller handed me and said, study this. So when a guy like Gary hands you a book and says, study this, you listen. Because if you want to build $1 billion company, which is the road that we're on to, you have to start thinking differently. And the book really looks at who are the businesses that have been building a linear business where year after year they get, they go for 10% growth versus those businesses that have exponential growth, the Facebooks, the Ubers, the Airbnbs. What does it look like to have an exponential organization? What does your org chart need to look like? How do you set things up? What's the culture? How do you start thinking? It's just the greatest gift I've gotten from being inside of Gary Keller's world is the gift of thinking bigger. The gift of setting a goal that you think is so massive and that you put it in front of a guy like him and for him to then stretch it 100x. When you start thinking that big, then you just realize how truly unlimited your potential is. How did you meet Gary?
I didn't. I met Jay. So I was in medical device sales. It was our national sales meeting. I walked into this ballroom, beautiful ballroom, and on every single chair, we're talking about over 1,000 chairs in the room, was a copy of The One Thing. I picked it up. I'm like, oh, this looks cool. Start flipping through it. Surprisingly simple truth behind extraordinary results. Then I hear some clapping, and out on stage walks Jay Papasan, who co-authored the book with Gary. For the next hour, Jay proceeded to blow my mind. This is 2 weeks after I launched the Mentee podcast, where I'm putting an intense focus on surrounding myself with people who are where I want to be. I'm realizing this is a sign. When Jay finishes speaking and everybody else is sitting in their seats just clapping like, yay, Jay, I got my ass out of the seat and I started running down the side of the room because I wanted to be the very first person that would shake his hand.
Were you?
Yes.
Awesome.
And I asked him if I could interview him for the Mentee as a way to bring more exposure for the book, trying to add value to Jay. He said yes. At the end of our interview, I asked him a question. What are you working on? How can I help you? He said, we're looking for more exposure. I said, okay. So then I started getting him booked on all these other people's podcasts. I wrote an article on entrepreneur.com about the book. I started sharing it on social media. I saw Jay and Gary retweeting my tweets, and I retweeted back to Jay, which I don't tweet. I said, what are you working on? How can I help you? He said, Gary and I are looking for a CEO for a new company. I said, I'm a super connector. I know a lot of people who are talented. Let's talk so I can connect you, hopefully with a qualified candidate. When Jay told me what they were looking for, I said, I got some ideas. Let me call you back in a few days. I sat in my car in silence for 5 minutes, which never happens. I walked into my house, looked at my wife and said, I just had a phone call and I wouldn't be surprised if we ended up moving to Texas. She said, what are you talking about? I said, hold on. I ran into my office, grabbed my recorder and documented the whole thing because I knew in my bones something had just happened. I called Jay back 2 days later and I said, I literally was getting on the phone to try to bring value to you, to connect you with my Rolodex, but I'm your guy. So what's the process? And now I'm standing in his office physically as we speak.
That's an incredible story. And I knew that there was a connection, but I did not know that there was that connection. One thing I want to touch on just briefly, you said, is you immediately wanted to add value to Jay. And then the question you asked, and you said it a couple times today, is how can I help you? I think what people don't realize is the value and the importance of being sincere and asking somebody, whether it's a referral source or a business partner or just a friend or a colleague, is if you truly believe in helping people and then follow up by asking, how can I help you? I believe those two things can have such a profound impact in all areas of life.
Yeah, the one caveat to that is when you start approaching, quote, higher level people who maybe have a more success under their belt, people who, especially the people who have more fame or notoriety, if you say, how can I help you? They're going to go, I don't know, how can you help me? I've stopped asking the question, how can I help you? And the question I asked you is, out of everything you're working on, where do you need help most right now? That's not me asking you, how can I help you? Because you don't know how I can help you. I'm asking you a question you can answer. Out of everything you're working on, where do you need help most right now?
No, and I'm so glad you said that, because that just drills down the question so much more, because you're being very specific with it. And I think everybody could use a lot of help in different areas in their life, but where can I help you most, or what do you need help with the most right now? I think that just puts a whole different spin on it in regards to how you go about everything.
Here's the point I want to make. These are little subtle tweaks that make a massive difference. The only way you figure these tweaks out for yourself is by taking action. You can listen to this and you can go, wow, this is great if you think it's great. And if you think it sucks, then I respect that too. You have to put it into action. You're going to start to realize what's going to work for you, your personality, and what isn't going to work. And just like if you're at the beach and you reach down and you grab a big handful of sand, some of that sand is going to sift through your fingers. And that's okay, because all you're looking for is that handful that you're able to hold on to. We're sharing a lot of ideas with you right now. The idea is that you grab a hold of them, put them into action, figure out which don't work, allow them to sift through your fingers, but those few, maybe the one that really does matter, that does resonate with you, you make that a habit.
That's great advice. Here's a different question for you. If you could go back today and give the 20-year-old version of yourself only one piece of advice, what would it be?
Surround yourself with the right people. I don't even have to wait on that one. When I get on the phone with somebody who listens to the One Thing podcast or to the Mentee podcast, and I find out that they're 18, 19, 20, 21, and they're already investing in their personal development like that, they're already talking about upgrading their 5, they're already seeking out mentors. Wow. If I had known, I'm trying to think when I officially, 27 maybe, so we're talking about 4 years now of me intensely focusing on upgrading my 5. If you had told the 27-year-old version of me that in just 4 years I'd be the face of the highest rated book of all business book of all time, or that I'd be able to call a guy like Gary Keller partner, I would have told you you're nuts. But the lead domino was just simply surrounding myself with the right people and trying to bring value to them.
That's such simple advice, but the thing that you talk about, and you've mentioned a couple times, and I've referenced it, is it's all about taking action. You can want all you want, you can think all you want, but hopefully, listeners, what you're getting some incredible value today from Geoff, and I hope that the one thing that you take away from it, again, not a plug on the one thing, but is that you go ahead and you actually take action.
Mm-hmm.
Here's an interesting question for you. We always ask this question every episode. If you could have dinner with anyone, dead or alive, who would it be and why?
Yeah, I've actually got, this was asked, I was at a mastermind with about 20 other business owners, and the question was asked. The first person talked about how they would love to have dinner with Steve Jobs because look at his vision, look at what he was able to build. And I'm going, yeah, they would be Steve Jobs. Then the next person said Elon Musk because look at how much bigger he thinks and the idea of creating an interplanetary species and just, wow. I'm going, yep, it's Elon Musk. It's not Jobs. And then the next guy goes, no, it's Mark Zuckerberg because honestly, look at what he's building and that is the future. I'm going, oh my gosh, it's Zuckerberg. Then it comes around to me. And this interesting thing happened to me, which has happened in a few pivotal moments in my life, which is when I feel like there's an answer that I should say, yet something inside of me makes me just relax. My ego drops, the desire to sound smart goes away. I just speak from the heart. The words that came out were, I don't know their name. I don't know if they're a man or a woman, but I know they exist. And the person that I am just so thirsty to meet is that person who has figured out how to thrive professionally while thriving personally and blend this Eastern and Western culture together. The idea of mindfulness, the idea of achievement, the idea of hustling, but also still being able to power it down and be present. I don't know who you are, but if you're listening to this, Geoff at theonething.com.
Geoff, we'll have lunch or dinner next week. Thank you.
Okay. So, serious?
Yeah, where are you right now?
I'm in Austin, but is that you?
That's me. I'll find a way down to Austin.
So, see, now here's what's interesting about this. Like, I would have never freaking known that's your thing, right? Yet, I have clarity on the type of people I'm trying to meet. And I talk about it. There you go.
Oh, that's awesome. So I wanted to ask you if there's anything exciting or you're working on that you'd like to share with our listeners so they can check it out.
Sure. Jay asked me a question. He said, what business are we in? I said, we're in the time business. He goes, yeah. And specifically what? I said, I don't know. He said, well, what are people's biggest challenges with time? I said, I don't know. He said, go figure it out. I said, okay. So I set out on a mission over the last 4 months to really understand when it comes to your time, your most valuable resource, what your challenges are. And we worked with 305 people closely. And what we've discovered is that you have 3 big challenges with time. First is people lack clarity. They lack clarity over their purpose, why they're here on this earth. They lack clarity over what they really want. If we were to sit down and I asked you, what do you actually want out of life? Would you go, boom, this is what I want? Or would we suddenly hear silence? People lack clarity over what their goals really are, not what they think they should be based on what society says, but what their goals are based on what they want. They lack clarity on how to accomplish their goals. People lack control of their time. They feel like they have to attend those meetings. They feel like they need to be in their email. They feel like they have to say yes when their colleague, their boss comes up and says, "Hey, do you got a minute?" And ultimately, people lack the right community. They lack an environment, a support group of people who understand that it's okay for you to put yourself first, for you to say no, and that will stretch and grow you. Over the last 4 months, we've been developing a system that actually helps people solve all of them, getting more clarity, taking back control of their time, and having a supportive community to doing it. It's called Living Your One Thing. We literally launched it yesterday. So you guys, if you go to theonething.com, that's with the number one, you can find it out there, or you can go to theonething.com/membership. This is very transparently the most valuable premium resource we've created since the book. And it is just, it's awesome.
So just clarity again, that's theonething.com with the number one.
Yep.
Awesome. And then just wanted to ask you, Geoff, do you have any parting words for our listeners today?
Yes. Well, this is where you and I are aligned, Chris. The idea of getting into action, right? Consuming content is great. I honor you for listening to this if you're still listening. The greatest value will come when you put this into action. I've been one of those guys who feels like they should read an audiobook a week, who would listen to it at 3x speed. Just the more books I read, the better, right? Yeah, when I start this company with Gary and Jay, I realize I have to live the book, and I've just intensely been studying and living the one thing and just constantly realizing how much deeper it goes. My challenge to you would be to identify that book for you, whatever it is. And how can you go on a mission, a journey to mastering it? What would that look like for you? Maybe it's not a book, maybe it's a podcast. Maybe you make a commitment that after every podcast episode, you put something into action. I don't know what that is for you. Develop the habit of converting content to action and watch what becomes possible for you in your life.
Well, that's some great stuff, and I love that, content to action. Listen, last question, and I promise it's an easy one. Obviously, you mentioned theonething.com. What's another way for our listeners to follow you in regards to you personally and some of the stuff you're working on, as well as your podcasts?
Sure. So the One Thing podcast is a great way, since you already listen to podcasts. The website, if you go to theonething.com and you click on the free stuff tab, download any of those PDFs or guides. There's some great stuff on there. You'll be on our list, and we send out lots of value out that way. Our Facebook page is facebook.com/theonethingbook. And I do a Facebook Live every Monday where I try to bring you behind the scenes. So we're everywhere, just trying to bring value.
No, that's awesome. And listen, I just need to thank you. You've delivered some awesome stuff. And as I mentioned early on, is the two things that we have in common are the CTAs, the calls to action, but more importantly, it's going ahead and being accountable for what you're doing. So I cannot thank you enough, not only for your time, but I also want to thank you for some of the great stuff you shared with us as well.
Appreciate it, Chris. Thank you.
To sum up today's episode and our theme of the day, taking action, Geoff truly practices what he preaches. One thing he spoke about numerous times was taking action and being accountable. When we discussed the topic of mentors, Geoff was emphatic with the concept of adding value and asking specifically, what is the most important thing you need help with right now? Talk about a great question. Geoff then touched upon the importance of being able to identify your need, your goal, or your want in one or two very specific sentences. Geoff referenced the famous quote by Jim Rohn, "You are the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with." Who was in your top 5? In his concluding remarks, Geoff shared the importance of taking action. One thing he said really hit me hard. The greatest value is when you put great content into action. So for you, our listeners, today's CTA, our call to action, is take that great value and do something with it. If you enjoyed today's episode, and if you connected with something that Geoff said, don't just sit, don't just think, but do. Decide right now, decide right here, and take action. Take action and go for your greatness. And lastly, to our listeners, thank you.
We truly appreciate your time, and we hope our episodes inspire you to keep on attacking life and never giving up. To quote Dr. Norman Vincent Peale, it's always too early to quit.